Assalamu alaikum. In this video, we'll look at how, according to rabbinic literature, God is under the law of the Torah. God has to keep the commandments, which is inappropriate. So we'll start with the Jerusalem Talmud. It says, usually in the world, the king of flesh and blood decides a decision. If he desires it, he keeps it. If he desires it, others keep it. But the Holy One, praise to him, is not so. But if he decides a decision, he keeps it first. What is the reason? They have to keep my watch. I am the Eternal. I am he who keeps the commandments of the Torah first. Okay, so it's pretty clear God keeps the commandments of the Torah. Now let's go to this tradition in Genesis Rabbah. Zoom in here. Okay. Another matter, the Lord tests the righteous. This refers to Abraham. It was after these matters God tested Abraham. Rabbi Avin began, since governance is by the king's word, and who can say to him, what are you doing? Rabbi Avin said, this is analogous to a master who commands his disciple and says to him, you shall not distort judgment, but he himself distorts judgment. You shall not show preference, but he himself shows preference. You shall not take a bribe, but he himself takes a bribe. Do not lend with usury, but he himself lends with usury. His disciples said to him, my master, you say to me, do not lend with usury, yet you lend with usury. Is it permitted for you and prohibited for me? He said to him, I am telling you, do not lend with usury to an Israelite, but you may lend with usury to an idolater, as it is written, to a stranger you may lend with interest, but to your brother do not lend with interests. So Israel said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, you wrote in your Torah, you shall not take revenge, and you shall not bear a grudge. Yet you take revenge, and you bear a grudge, as it is stated, the Lord is vengeful and full of wrath. The Lord is vengeful to his foes, and bears a grudge against his enemies. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to them, I wrote in the Torah, you shall not take revenge, and you shall not bear a grudge against the members of your people, but I take revenge, and I bear a grudge against idolaters. Quote, take the vengeance of the children of Israel. You shall not test the Lord, your God. Yet God tested Abraham. Okay. I think that's very clear if you followed along. Basically, they give a parallel. They give a parable of how if you have a teacher and he instructs his student to do this, do that, do this. Okay, but he himself doesn't keep that instruction. So he's basically a hypocritical teacher. And that is a parable for God, because God said to Israel, do this, do that, do this in the Torah. But according to the Israelites, God himself doesn't follow all these practices. Okay, God himself doesn't follow all these practices. He himself doesn't keep all the instruction he gave the Israelites. And God responds by saying, oh, I only take, so they're accusing him of taking vengeance and hence breaking the law of the Torah. God says, no, I only take vengeance against the Gentiles, so I don't really break the law of the Torah. Okay? So the backdrop of all this, the assumption of this tradition is that God is obligated to keep the laws of the Torah, right? That is the assumption of this tradition. It is from that backdrop that this tradition is coming from, right? If there was no assumption here that God has to keep the laws of the Torah, God would say, I don't have to keep the laws of the Torah. That's for you. That's not for me, right? That's why God's defense is, I wrote in the Torah, you shall not take revenge and you shall not bear a grudge against the members of your people, meaning don't keep a grudge, etc., against the Israelites. But I take revenge and I bear grudge against idolaters. Okay? So, again, God's defense is, I didn't actually break the law of the Torah because my grudge is against idolaters, whereas the Torah just says don't have a grudge against Israelites. You get it? So, of course, the assumption is God has to keep the law. If God said, what are you talking about? I don't need to keep the law or something, or the Israelites, the fact that they're accusing him of breaking the law itself assumes that God has to keep the law. So I hope that's clear. And with that, we'll now move to, again, the same midrash, Genesis Rabbah. Okay, it says, he said to him, this Shabbat too, the Holy One, blessed be he, wished to honor it. He said to him, from where can you prove it to me? He said to him, the Sambation River proves it, as it flows with stones all the days of the week, but on Shabbat it rests. He said to him in astonishment, are you dragging me to a river? So the assumption here is that God keeps the Sabbath. God keeps the Sabbath. And the proof of this, according to this rabbi, is we know God keeps the Sabbath because there's this river and it flows all the days of the week except on the seventh day. Okay. So he returned to Rabbi Akiva and said to him, "If it is as you say, that the Holy One, blessed be He, honors the Sabbath, let him not make the wind blow on Sabbath. Let him not make rain fall. Let him not allow grass to grow." He said to him, "May the spirit of that man depart from him. I will tell you a parable. It is analogous to two people who resided in the same courtyard. If one does not contribute to the Erev, and the other one contributes to the Erev, is it perhaps permitted to transport items in the courtyard? However, if one person resides in a courtyard alone, it is permitted for him to transport items in the entire courtyard. Here too, the Holy One, blessed be He, because there is no other power that coexists with Him, and the entire world is His, it is permitted for Him to transport items throughout the entire world. Additionally, those who partook of the manna can attest to it, as all the days of the week it would fall, but on Sabbath it did not fall." Okay, so so this is just further confirming that God has to keep the Sabbath. It's just a continuation of what we read from here. So, all the stuff about this parable, about if someone, is in this situation, it's prohibited for him to do this on the Sabbath, but if he's in another situation, he's allowed on the Sabbath to do this. This is used as justification for God. Because God is the only one, there's no God with him, therefore, on the Sabbath, he can blow winds, he can let the rain fall, etc. Otherwise, it would be prohibited for him on Sabbath to do that. So, again, the assumption here is that God has to keep the Sabbath, and the Sabbath comes with certain rules and regulations. The regulation of transporting certain items doesn't apply to God because he's the only one. Okay? So that's not a part of the Sabbath for him, because according to Sabbath law, that wouldn't be a part of the Sabbath for anyone, and by analogy, it wouldn't be a part of Sabbath for God, anyone in this particular situation to which God is compared. But anyway, again, the assumption is God has to keep the Sabbath. Okay. Another midrash. "Open your doors, O Lebanon, and let the fire consume your cedars. And so too they said, He has hurled fire into my bones. Israel said to him, Master of the world, how long will it be like this? Did you not write in your Torah, the one who ignited the fire shall surely pay? Again, the one who ignited the fire shall surely pay. And you are the one who ignited the fire, as it says, from above he has hurled fire into my bones. You need to rebuild it and to console us, not at the hands of an angel, but you in your glory. The Holy One said to him, By your life, so I will do. As it says, the Lord is the builder of Jerusalem. He will gather the outcasts of Israel. And I am the one who consoles you. From where do we learn this? From that which they read in the prophets. I am he who consoles you. Okay, so again, you get this point that according to the book of Exodus, if someone ignites a fire, he has to pay restitution. Okay, that's the law of the Torah. If you ignite a fire, you have to pay restitution for that. You have to fix that situation. Now, God destroyed the temple with fire, and therefore God has to pay restitution to Israel because the Torah says if you light a fire, you have to pay restitution. Since God punished them by lighting a fire on them, he has to pay them back. So the law of restitution for arsony, for lighting a fire, applies to God as well. Again, the assumption is God has to keep the Torah. Another midrash, Rabbi Berachia said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, there is no day that the Holy One, blessed be He, does not introduce a new halakha in the supernal court. What is the source? Hear the fury of his voice, the sound that emerges from his mouth. And Hageh means nothing other than Torah, like the matter that is stated, you shall ponder it day and night. Okay, so this is a bit different, but it is interesting that they believe that new laws keep being introduced. Right? Every day a new law. This is very strange because Moses is not here, right? Prophets aren't here to institute new laws. Okay. Another midrash here. Another matter. These are the ordinances. Exodus 21:1. That is what is written. He declares his words to Jacob. These are the commandments, his statutes and ordinances to Israel. These are the ordinances. Because the attributes of the Holy One, blessed be He, are unlike the attributes of flesh and blood, the attributes of flesh and blood is that He instructs others to perform, but He does not perform anything. The Holy One, blessed be He, is not so. What He performs, He says to Israel to perform and to observe. There was an incident involving Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva, who went to Rome and expounded, "The ways of the Holy One, blessed be He, are unlike flesh and blood, as they issue an edict and say to others to perform, but the Holy One, blessed be He, is not so. There was a particular heretic there. After the audience departed, he said to the rabbis, 'Your words are nothing but falsehood. Did you not say that God says and performs? Why does He not observe Shabbat?'" Meaning the Sabbath. They said to him, "Wicked one of the world, is a person not permitted to carry within his courtyard on the Shabbat, on Saturday?" He said to him, "Yes." They said to him, "The upper and lower realms are the courtyard of the Holy One, blessed be He," as it stated. The entire world is filled with His glory. And is it not so that even if a person is in a location where it's forbidden to carry, he may carry a distance equivalent to his height? He said to them, "Yes." They said to him, "It is written, 'Do I not fill the heavens and the earth?'" So again, they're justifying and trying to defend this accusation that God doesn't keep the Sabbath. This is from the Babylonian Talmud. So this rabbi continues and says to them, "If so, I will say to you a matter that is appropriate to both of you," which contains both halacha and agadah. In the verse that states, "If a fire breaks out and catches in thorns," the term breaks out indicates that it breaks out by itself. Yet the continuation of the verse states, "The one who kindled the fire shall pay compensation," which indicates that he may pay only if the fire spread due to his negligence. The verse can be explained allegorically. The Holy One, blessed be He, said, "It is incumbent upon me to pay restitution for the fire that I kindled." Again, he said, and this time I'll read it with the commentary, he said that although the fire broke out in the temple due to the sins of the Jewish people, it is incumbent upon me to pay restitution for the fire that I kindled. Again, this idea that God has to keep the law of arsony. "I, God, kindled a fire in Zion, as it is stated, 'The Lord has accomplished His fire, He has poured out His fierce anger, and He has kindled a fire in Zion, which has devoured its foundation. And I will build it with fire in the future,' as it stated, 'For I, says the Lord, will be for her a wall of fire round about, and I will be the glory in her midst.'" There's a halacha that can be learned from the verse in Exodus, as the verse begins with damage caused through one's property. If a fire breaks out and concludes with the damage caused by one's body, that serves to say to you that the liability for his fire damage is due to its similarity to his arrows. Anyway, so we see the Babylonian Talmud assumes that God has to keep the law of the Torah, specifically the law. This law is cited as an example. We see again God has to keep the laws of the Torah. It says, and He keeps the law of the Sabbath. Okay, again, the law of arsony, Sabbath, etc., etc. It's pretty clear at this point. Rabbinic literature assumes that God has to keep the law of the Torah. That's quite inappropriate. God has to keep the law that He sent to humans. Again, they're humanizing God. Again, we see this theme of wanting to turn God into a religious Jew. Making Him observe Jewish commandments is an example of that.